Here's your text with punctuation added carefully, while keeping the traditional and slightly conversational tone you seem to prefer. This is the troubling hybrid future of Lamborghini. Doesn't look too bad, does it? If this film sisses your doors, then do please think about joining the Haggerty Drivers Club. You get an award-winning magazine and myriad other benefits. To find out more, just click on the link below. Now, if you're emotionally conflicted about the idea of a hybrid Lamborghini, I've got something from the Raging Bull's back catalog that might soothe your worried mind a little. It's one of the many amazing creations that came from Ferrucci's fantastically fertile engineering mind. So we've come to the Ferruccio Lamborghini Museum, not to talk about his prototype Lamborghini helicopter that he built in 1965, nor do I want to talk about his Lamborghini air conditioning units. I'd quite like to talk about Lamborghini's offshore powerboats, because they're just incredibly cool. This one has two 8.1 LV12s in it, but I'm not going to talk about it because, well, it happened after Ferruccio Lamborghini had left the company. I want to talk about Ferruccio Lamborghini's tractors, specifically his very first one. This is the Carrocca, which is ingenious for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it was very cheap to build, which was important at the time because straight after the war, this was built in 1948. This part of Italy, in particular, which was based on agriculture, was ravaged by the war, to be honest, and needed to get up on its feet and moving again. But it needed cheap machinery like this. So Lamborghini built it from, I suppose, salvaged, reclaimed parts from the war machine, including things like this Morris engine, which he was used to working on from his time based on the island of Rhodes. However, what is interesting to us is this bit down here, because this is a dual-fuel Lamborghini. It's a hybrid, like the Revuelto. What he realized was that although it needed to start on gasoline or petrol, which was very expensive at the time, once it was up and running and it was warm, you could then run it on vaporized heating oil, which was much, much cheaper. And this was all down here. So you move this little lever down here, and hey presto, suddenly you had a cheap-to-buy and cheap-to-run tractor. At 450,000 pounds, or over $600,000, the Revuelto obviously isn't cheap to buy. And unless you want to do all journeys in tiny 6-mile chunks, it won't be cheap to run either, because without plugging in or waking up some pistons, that's the maximum EV range you can get from the 3.8 kilowatt-hour battery. That battery sits in the middle of the car, powering two 110 kilowatts axial flux motors in the angular snout in EV mode. There's a third radial flux e-motor behind the driver, where you also find the traditional 6.5-liter naturally aspirated V12. But it's a V12 that's been switched to 180 degrees, so the gearbox is now all the way out the back. It's a different gearbox too, and that's perhaps the first thing to say, actually, to do with the hybrid system. We've now got an 8-speed DCT, dual-clutch transmission, as opposed to the single-clutch ISR box that was in all the Aventadors. And this is so much better. I know there were all sorts of reasons why it was thought it would be more emotive to have that single-clutch box, but to be honest, I never liked it. It just wasn't very good. It felt pretty clunky. This is so much smoother and just better. As a system total, this can put out 1,001 brake horsepower. The engine on its own? 814 brake horsepower. What's more, that engine makes its 814 brake horsepower at over 9,000 RPM. Would you also like me to help polish this text even further for style or flow, depending on where you intend to use it? For example, a script, article, or narration? 9,250 RPM to be precise, with a limiter at 9.5. It also produces 535 lb-ft of torque at 6,750 RPM. And I love that it lives. Also, its cam cover's nestled in a carbon valley that you look down at every time you glance in the mirror. So, how does the Revuelto sound? Well, pretty quiet if you're in EV mode, fairly obviously. But if you switch to Strata, then you get the lovely theatrics of it waking up. However, if you drive around in hybrid, which is what it principally does in Strata, or in fact Sport as well, the noise is interesting but not exactly spine-tingling most of the time at sort of normal speeds, pottering around. There's a sort of bit of whine, almost like it's got a supercharger on it, but you don't get much of the V12. In order to do that, you really need to go to sport, pop it into performance, and then get stuck in. Although it might not sound like it, there is actually a certain politeness to its voice, a smooth shout rather than a bellicose bellow that you feel in your chest. Certainly, there's room for an SV or an SVR. Don't get me wrong, it does sound very, very good, but just perhaps not quite as sort of growly and dirty as the old engine. Perhaps a slightly cleaner, greener sounding engine was the aim for this hybrid era. But that would be like a vegan cantina at a coal mine, wouldn't it? I've never really thought of Lamborghini as particularly eco-conscious, not very verde and virtuous, not very caring for the planet. I cannot imagine why, given the sort of cars that they produce. But actually, they do seem to care a little bit more than I thought. This hybrid, you might think, is just hopping on the bandwagon. Hashtag trending, we're doing it because we have to. But actually, the factory in Sant'Agata has been carbon neutral since 2015, nearly a decade. They use renewable gas and solar energy for it. They have planted 10,000 oak trees for a local park. And they have an apiary, which is beekeeping, to you and me, not a home for retired orangutans. So, whilst producing a hybrid isn't something that's really going to save the planet, Lamborghini is doing a little bit more than I first thought. Maybe they're also allowed to claim carbon offset from the chassis, front subframe, and most of the bodywork on the Revuelto, which is all made of carbon fiber of one sort or another. At the end of the day, this still remains a Lamborghini that is more concerned with 0 to 62 than CO2. The performance is stunning, it's just incredible. 0 to 62 in 2.5 seconds. Top speed is 270 miles an hour. But it's the response. Because you've got the electric motors, there's just so much response. It's like that naturally aspirated feel but on steroids, because you don't have to be high up in the rev range to get the really sharp response. It's there all the time. The only slightly curious thing, perhaps something that I miss a bit, is that you don't get much of a crescendo. It's so linear now, yes, the sound changes. But because you've got the initial punch, it's not as though you've got a sort of real crescendo build in the power curve. It is so accessible though. However, I think this hybrid powertrain is actually more extraordinary not for what it does in a straight line, for how it accelerates, but for what it can do in the corners. You see, because we've got the two electric motors on the front axle, they can torque vector, add in the rear wheel steering on this, and the car is just so agile. It's really easy to drive at low speeds. It's not intimidating like the 12 Lambos of old at all, because even the Aventador was pretty intimidating. Yes, this still has the drama. It's wonderful to get into. You've got the scissor doors. You sit in here. This view out is quintessential big Lambo, with its widescreen view out through this sort of extended letterbox. All that is still every bit as exciting and individual as before, but this is now so much more approachable in terms of its chassis. It's really good that this is now a fixed ratio rack on here, none of the variable ratios from before. So it's just that much more predictable, more intuitive. Even in their hard, or duro, setting, these dampers soak up the bumps on these really pretty bad Italian roads incredibly well. In fact, you really don't want the soft setting when you're driving quickly, because the magnetite dampers can't keep enough control of the car's mass over bigger bumps. Hard is a bit of a misnomer, as it's still pliant, it just lets you lean on the double wishbones with more confidence. Even the brakes, which are something that Lamborghini's not always got on very well with in the past. I remember Gallardos, when they first got carbon ceramics, were pretty terrible, have improved. There's just been, sometimes, a lack of pedal feel particularly. It just felt a bit vague, particularly at the top. These are really positive, despite the fact they have to deal with Regan as well. Absolutely spot on. And when you add it all together, the damping, the torque vectoring, the rear wheel steer, this fixed ratio rack, it's just absolutely brilliant in the corners. It's so agile, it's so sharp on the way in, but you don't feel like you've got a really big, heavy V12 behind you. In fact, the whole car does not feel heavy. This weighs well between 200 to 250 kilos more than an Aventador. But it feels lighter, it really does. and by quite a bit. Drive is hard, and it feels more like a Huracan than a big V12 Lambo in the way that it goes around corners. Sport is really good on the road, and the ESP Sport is just about perfect. And it's playful too. That's not what you're used to doing with a big V12 Lambo. It feels approachable, and really quite friendly and fun. Then you can feel how it's apportioning that traction underneath you. If you bring up the right graphic, you can actually see the way the car's LDVI2 brain is torque vectoring with the front wheels. The ESC can also use the rear e-motor to drag on the engine instead of cutting the ignition. It's such clever stuff. But the important thing is that, from behind the wheel, the car feels as deliciously uncomplicated as a pizza margherita. It's both agile but also talkative, really quite tactile and friendly. This picks up from the Technica, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, and really took the Huracan to another level, along with the STO. This just feels brilliant to drive. Even in a sort of more relaxed fashion, it's lovely in the way that it's so pointy but actually very calm in the way that you can thread it through corners. And I say it rides well, but it doesn't roll too much, so you feel really confident in where the grip is. Brilliant, it's harmonious. All the components come together. No flies in the handling ointment, or swarf in the dynamic sump. Even the seats feel better than before. Talking of which, the interior of this, I think, is a mixture of the very recognizable Lamborghini, with a few nods to other manufacturers, and I also think it's missing one button. Recognizable Lamborghini bits? Well, we've obviously got the bottoms away sort of cover here for the start/stop button. Love that. And also the cage toggle switches here for everything from, well, fuel there to windows down here. Also this, which is for reverse, which seems like a bit of whimsy, but actually works very well. Obviously the big distinctive paddles behind the wheel as well, still fixed, which I personally rather like. Down here on the wheel, well, we've got a nod to sort of Ferrari I suppose, with all the buttons here, but Lamborghini's been doing it for a while as well. Things like the indicators here. But I think it's very Porsche GT3 RS. The way we've got these switches here, which, up here, you've got the different modes. So City, Strata, Sport, Corsa, and ESC off, which you toggle between like that. Down here, dampers soft and hard, and then the middle, nose lift, which is very good. I think having a button that you can go straight to for that is pretty important with a car that rides as low as this. Up here, well, you go through your different EV modes. So hybrid, recharge, and then performance if you're in Sport or Corsa. Down here you've got the aero one as well, and you can put the wing up if you like showing off and running the lines of the car. On the back of this as well, you've also got some other buttons, 10 in fact, which control screens there. And although it seems pretty confusing to start with, they work pretty well, and it's much better than having sort of haptics here or something. Talking of buttons and screens, this, in portrait, actually reminds me quite a lot of McLaren for some reason. And it's okay, but really not my favorite system to use. This screen up here as well, for some reason, just makes me think of McLaren, although the exposed hex bolts there, not quite sure about, aesthetically. The other screen over there, also very Ferrari. However, the button that it's missing, when you go through villages, particularly in Italy, it seems they always want you to rev the engine. And because you haven't got a clutch pedal to be able to sort of dip that, and just give it a quick blip, I think there should be a button on the steering wheel for when you're going through a village and a load of people go, "Give it some revs!" And you just press it, vroom. That would be brilliant. That's what Lamborghini needs. The trouble is, you'd have to vet customers. Devise a whole new driving exam to check they knew when it was actually appropriate to use. Because this is a car that can be driven quietly and easily, and at times, that should probably be embraced. Traditionalists will scoff and say V12 Lamborghinis should be permanently intimidating and scary and loud, even at 30 miles per hour, free chest wigs all round, and reversing cameras sit on the sill. But as long as the visceral highs remain, is it such a bad thing if they can be combined with some more undemanding, calm miles? You could say it's a car of contrasting flavors, like walking into the gelateria and getting chocolate ice cream and strawberry sorbet. It's worth trying sometime. But I think it's more than that. It got me thinking about the Japanese philosophy of which is, well, the idea of negative space. It's the pauses in conversation, the silences in a piece of music, that give the whole thing framework. And so it is with this. Because whilst driving around town in EV mode perhaps isn't the most interesting thing, it's not the thing we're going to fill a film with, but actually, those silences serve to contrast with the V12 and heighten it, and perhaps make you look forward to it a little bit more. And those moments really are to be relished. If this is Lamborghini and hybrids, I am here for it. On days like these,